If you've been told learning another shape will fix your boring guitar solos, think again. Guitarists and their fascination with learning more and more shapes is the problem, the reason solos sound boring and robotic. You can memorize every box and every fingering on the fretboard, but until you understand how the notes and the shapes actually sound and function over chords and how to connect them in a way that hits home emotionally, your solos are going to stay stuck in shape mode and you'll never be able to play things that are melodic and expressive like this. Today, I'll show you what makes a solo musical, how to get beyond just playing shapes, how to hear the sound of the notes, and I'll actually give you the formula to playing with feel and expression. Grab your favorite guitar, open up your mind, let's get into it. The real issue here is if you just run up and down a scale, you're playing a bunch of notes that aren't wrong, but you're not choosing to play the best notes. You're trusting a pattern to make you sound good. And that's not what those patterns are designed to do. The truth is, after a certain point, learning more scale patterns is like giving an alcoholic a bottle of whiskey. It's just going to make things worse. Running patterns becomes your go-to, and that's what makes you sound like a robot. What really makes you sound better is knowing how to use the notes in a pattern better and more creatively. Let's start off with an example of why patterns themselves aren't the answer, and we're going to do it over a simple 1-4-5 blues in A. Over that blues in A, we're going to use a very famous pattern called the B.B. box after B.B. King. This little pattern has the notes the root, the second, the flat third, the fourth, fifth, and sixth. And we can also play the sixth at the 11th fret of the G string underneath that root note. Now, B.B. King used this pattern to make all kinds of blues magic for decades, but he didn't do it just playing the pattern. Check out what that pattern sounds like over a blues if we just play those 6 notes up and back. Doesn't sound anything like the blues, does it? So our job as a musician is to get to know the different notes in a pattern, how they sound or function over different chords, and then we can pick and choose the notes that sound the best and really express what we want to say in our solo. So let's figure out what we can do with the B.B. box. So over the 1 chord or A7, we've got the root note, which sounds like home and it lets the audience know that we know what key we're in. We're going to skip the second for now and go to the flat third or C. And the flat third over a dominant 7 chord, which has a major third or C sharp in it, well, that's the sound of the blues. I can play just the root, flat third, and the root again, add some vibrato, and we've got a legit blues lick. How about playing the root, flat third, and then the fourth? And we get that suspended fourth sound that adds a little tension because it sounds like our idea is unfinished. And we're going to relieve that tension by resolving back to the root. We can spice things up a little bit by playing the minor third on the way up and bending into the major third on the way back down. And that major minor shift, that's huge if you want your blues licks to really sound great. We can add the fifth or E to that last lick and add a little trill before descending. And we've got a lick that Eric Clapton plays all the time. Now, the second, or B, it also creates some tension because it sounds unfinished, unresolved, and it wants to move to a chord tone like the root or the third. And we can create a lick using the sixth, another great note that sounds sort of suspended, the root, and the second. So we'd go sixth, root, second, sixth, and back to the root. Great little blues lick. How about starting on the F sharp or the sixth on the high E string, and then going to the fifth, then D or the fourth, back to E, bend the second into the minor third, release that bend back to the second, and resolve to the root. Killer blues lick. The real gold here, the real lesson I want you to get out of this, and I can't stress enough how important it is that in all of these licks, we're using notes that aren't in the A chord, the A7 chord. They're called non-chord tones. In those non-chord tones, they create a little tension, which we can then resolve by going back to a chord tone like the root, the third, or the fifth. Tension and resolution are what create movement and emotion in music, and all great lead guitarists are masters at using it. And you can't get it by just playing a pattern or scale straight up and down. Non-chord tones sound like questions to me, and when we resolve to a chord tone, well, that sounds like the answer. For instance, I can start off with the sixth, and it sounds unfinished, like someone is asking why. But if I go to the root, it's like an answer. Even if the questions are as simple as someone asking why and getting the answer because. The sixth, that sounds unfinished. Go to the root and it sounds final. Go from the sixth to the root to the second, and it sounds unfinished again, then go back to the root. There's our resolution. How about sixth, root, second, root, and the fourth, which sounds really unfinished. Then the fifth, which is a chord tone, and then we're going to really drive home the resolution by going back to the root. Now we've got multiple resolutions happening in the same lick. Here's one more. We're going to bend up to the sixth and really leave it hanging there for a moment to build up the tension, and then we're going to release that bend down to the fifth. Play the fourth, the fifth again, bend the second up to the minor third and release it. Do a trill between the root and second, the sixth, and then back to the root. That's a classic singing blues lick where we're doing this dance between chord tones and non-chord tones. And it's that movement from the weaker notes or the ones that sound slightly off to the stronger notes or chord tones. That's what makes a lick sound like a conversation, like we're saying something with our playing. Okay, that's an example over a simple blues. How about a more melodic chord progression? I heard one the other day that sounded great. We're going to use the chords A, E minor, G, and D. Now, there's a little trick in this progression in that when we're playing that A chord, we're in the key of A major, but over the E minor, G, and D chord, we're in the key of D major. Now, if we're just thinking scales and patterns, I'd tell you we're using the A major scale or the Ionian mode over A. Over the E minor, we're going to be using the D major scale, but when we play D major over E minor chord, we get E Dorian mode. Over G, that would be G Lydian. And over the D, we'd have D major or Ionian. That sounds way too scientific for rock and roll, right? And I promise you, if we approach it just thinking scales and modes, we're probably going to do a lot of starting from the root note and just running straight up and down the scale, which is the ultimate in lameness. Instead, let's play around with those chord and non-chord tones and create some cool melodies. As we go through these examples, I'm going to post a one-octave scale diagram that matches the chord each time the chords change. But we're going to start out by just playing the second interval of each chord and bending it up into the third. Over A, that would be the B note bent up to C sharp. Over E minor, it's going to be F sharp bent up to G. Over G major, it's going to be the A note bent up to B. And lastly, over D chord, we're going to play E and bend it up to F sharp. That's such a simple thing, but with just 2 notes for each chord, we're actually making a legitimate musical statement. Have a listen to this over the backing track. Let's add one more note, which is going to give us more tension to resolve. We're going to play the second of each chord, then the fourth, which is another non-chord tone, then go back to the second, bend it into the third like we did in our first example. So over A, that's going to be B, D, B again, and then C sharp. Over E minor, that's going to be F sharp, A, F sharp, bent to G. Over the G chord, it's going to be A, C sharp. Remember, we're in the key of D over that chord, then A bent up to B. Lastly, over the D chord, we're going to play E, G, back to that E and bend it up to F sharp. I'm going to play these phrases now over the backing track and really listen for how melodic and satisfying this little phrase is because of the movement, tension, and resolution. Now let's build out that phrase one more time. Once we bend up into the third, let's pick the bent note again and release it to the second, and then go on down to the root note to really give the phrase that strongest resolution. So now we've got this over the A chord. This sound over E minor. This over G. And this over the D chord. Now those notes themselves sound really great, but we're starting to add in phrasing elements like slides, the bend up into the third, and then vibrato when we get back to the root. Phrasing, that's what gives the notes that singing quality, like they're alive. And that's another thing you miss out on when you're just running patterns. Let's hear that new, longer phrase over the backing track. Now, we're not doing anything overcomplicated here. What we're doing is taking advantage of some very basic music theory by creating phrases that move between non-chord and chord tones. Non-chord tones create tension. Moving to a chord tone resolves that tension. That's the key to creating beautiful emotional melodies that really get in a listener's ear. And yes, we're guitar players. Of course we're going to play fast stuff. Nobody loves playing fast more than I do. But most listeners don't want to hear that stuff. Learn how to play great melodies. Use them to set up your fast licks, and those licks will sound even more impressive. Trust me on this. I've played in front of some of the world's greatest shredders, and they don't care how fast I can play. What got their attention and led to positive comments were the interesting melodies and motifs that I played in solos. And frankly, that was one of the greatest lessons that I ever got. I hope this video helps you break out of pattern style playing and to really start singing through your guitar. If you liked this video, check out this other one I've got queued up with other great ideas how to create melodies and guitar solos. Thanks for watching. Have fun with that guitar. I'll see you soon.